And that's part of the reason for today's show, because while someone may not have necessarily have lost a family member, there are thousands out there who are taking care of family members
Absolutely.
or friends who could be terminally ill. So, and that can make the holidays especially hard as well. So hence, today's show, we just want you to have the facts and know about your options and know the support that is out there. So you all have been in the community for 30 years, and does it ever get any easier, what you do, Erin?
I don't think it has to get easier. I don't think it's challenging work, but and hard work, I guess, but not in a negative way. We get so much back from the people that we serve. It's amazing the appreciation people have for just the simple things that we can do to alleviate emotional pain, spiritual pain, physical pain, whether it be with the patient and family or after the death with people who are grieving. With grieving people, they always feel better eventually, and that's really hopeful thing for us to look forward to and to share that hope with people who might not believe it at that time, that I'm never going to feel better again. But we know, because we see it so often, that people do feel better again, and we can help them get there.
Yeah.
Well, what did you want to add something?
Well, I was just going to say, grieving people often feel alone in their sadness, and one of the relieving things we offer in groups and many of our services is they look around the room and they say, I'm not alone. There's many people in this situation, and oh my goodness, where was I before when people were having losses?
Right, exactly.
They're much more keyed into it in the future then.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I participated in the 8-week support group, the very first person I met going to the group on the elevator was Marie, and our stories were so similar, and it's amazing. And it was almost refreshing, if you will, because you're like, does anybody else feel my pain? Does anybody else know what I'm experiencing? And it was almost like God put the two of us together right there, and she was sharing her story, and we've been able to be a support for one another since. But and I will say the support group for me, I was referred by a friend whose son was going through the Journeys program, and immediately, it was almost immediately after my mom died, she said, you might want to contact Hospice, because she knew how close my mom and I were. This was the first time ever in my life I experienced this type of grief. And I never want to go to that point again, those days following my mom when she died, but I appreciate her sharing that information with me, because at first I was like, no, I didn't want to hear it, but I knew as the days went on, I needed some help. I really did. And while my pastors and church family have been great, I needed to sit in a group with people, and I needed that support. And that's where Hospice came in to help me, and has helped me. It is helping me. But I do want to ask this question. We say grief, we use the term bereaved, we use the term mourning. What does it mean for someone to be grieving?
We generally think about mourning as those things that are external, that other people could see and observe, such as the way you look, tears. Grieving really has a lot more to do with what you're dealing with inside, how you're feeling. Some people describe it as a hole in the heart. Some people talk about it as a deep pit, a black hole, whatever it is, whatever sort of metaphor that they can use. Some people talk about their grief coming in waves, like big waves coming in off the sea. So individuals have their own sort of metaphor for what it feels like, but that's grief, is what's going on inside. And so in this culture of ours, we often think that people are not grieving anymore because we don't see them mourning. And that's not accurate. People grieve for a period of time beyond when you might see them actually visibly mourning. And bereaved is just a term that we used to refer to those who are grieving.
Okay, so I would be considered someone as bereaved, okay. And the grief, the 3 days of crying, that's grief.
That's grief.
That's grief, okay.
And mourning.
And mourning.
And mourning.
And mourning.
Mourning, okay.
And it's not
the
over.
grief is what's causing me to cry, I guess.
It's an
Yeah.
expression.
Expression.
It's an
of.
expression.
Okay.
And it's not over in
And you
those
said
3
it's
days.
not over. Right.
Or
Right.
6 months.
Right. Right.
It's an individual journey.
It is. Why does it hurt so bad? You know, I've heard people say it just hurts, and it does. And sometimes it's an inexplicable pain, but it just hurts.
Because you loved so much, is a simple way of thinking about it. Our grief can be an expression of the amount of love we held for the person who's died, who we've lost in our life. We like to talk about the relationship we had being only your relationship with your mom was special, no matter how many other people were in her life, and that relationship will continue through your whole life. But you have to come to terms with that during your grief process. The work we talk of that happens in grief, you have to realize that, and that helps with the hurt and the pain. But it's a measure in some way of how much you loved.
And are the waves a way of protecting us from just completely crashing under the weight of grief? Because if you felt it really all at once, could anyone survive it?
Well, I often in the first few months after a loss due to death, a lot of people have like that numbness feeling, or they feel like they're in a fog, things like that. And I tend to look at that as maybe it's our body's way or God's way of helping us slowly, fully realize in the mind, in the heart, in the soul, in our whole bodies that this has actually happened. And a lot of people say, if I realized everything all at once, it would kill me. I've heard people say that.
Yeah.
I remember when we did a holiday workshop a couple of years ago, that question came up, and at that time we reflected back to the group that if you just imagined that individuals could not survive grief, we wouldn't be here, because way back when, somebody would not have survived grieving. And it's only because as human beings we are resilient, because there is strength in the support that we give and get from each other, that we are able to go on and find joy in life. It's never going to be the same.
Right.
One thing we're very clear about telling individuals to come to us for support is that you are not going to get back to normal. There is a new normal. It's not what it used to be, and it will not be. You will not get over it. You won't, any of those kinds of phrases that we use to try to indicate that you will be able to move forward, but that's the way we like to think about it, is that you can move forward. You incorporate this experience in your life just as you have others. It takes a little while, it takes a special way of coping, but it's going to be incorporated in your life and you will go on.
Is there a such thing as good grief? I mean, we use the term kind of loosely, good grief, but and really thinking about it is there a such thing as good grief?
There are gifts of grieving.
There are gifts of grieving. Interesting. What are those, Denise?
There are a number of them. I'll start, you guys chime in. One of the gifts of grieving is something that Lori's already mentioned, and that is that once an individual has become a bereaved person, they have an appreciation for the ways in which individuals need support when they're faced with the death of someone that they loved. And sometimes they have an increased appreciation for their own lives. As they search for the meaning of this death and for the meaning of their life going forward, they appreciate small things a whole lot more. Sometimes people will tell us they have dramatic sort of conversion type experiences, but most often it's subtle, it's in little ways, but people have a renewed appreciation for life.
Okay. What are some other gifts?
I had a woman talk to me about this idea of, and it was something actually similar to what you experienced through with a support group that she attended, made connections. That group actually, now it must be 2 years ago, the last time I spoke with her, they still get together once a month. And so the connection she made with other people going through the experience with her mattered immensely to her and to the rest of the people in that same support group.
But how do you get someone to the point of thinking that there are gifts to grief? Because I remember thinking when I was over at my father's house Thanksgiving Eve and we were preparing to go to Maryland because we wanted to do something different, I was thinking we're only doing this because of what has happened to us. So it was hard for me to look at that in a positive way.
Yeah.
So how do you get a person to that point?
It's a journey.
It's a journey.
And it's a personal, individual journey, and that was pretty fresh at that time for you to be able to see any sort of gifts along the way, I think.
So
It's still
you'll
so
see it in time.
fresh.
It's so fresh.
It's still so fresh. And
Yeah.
grieving itself is a very healthy thing for us to do after a loss. I had a little boy ask me why we cry when someone dies, and the answer someone in the group gave was, well, what if you died and no one cried?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
being a measure of your love
Yeah.
is kind of the same thing stated by a child, but it's good for your physical body, it's good for your mental state.
Yeah.
You know how you feel after a good cry?
Yeah.
You feel some relief, and it does get better. Some of our group members have said it softens.
It softens.
It softens over time.
Okay.
And but there are other gifts that you can receive along the way as well. We've mentioned a few of them here. Friendships and
Yeah.
knowing you're not alone, and you can have an appreciation for the life of the person who lived. Sometimes, like, the person was in your life every day, and you can take that for granted.
Yeah.
And then when they're gone, it's such a sudden shock. But a renewed realization of that can help you create even a relationship for the future.
Yeah.
We encourage people to keep communication if that feels comfortable to them and fits
Communication
with
the
their,
deceased.
by writing, or some people just have conversations. They don't readily admit it, but if we bring it up, heads nod around the room saying,
Yeah.
oh yes, I still tell my husband what mail was in the mailbox today,
Yeah.
for example.
And because it is so about the relationship, sometimes relationships are not good between people. And there can be gifts in the grieving in those circumstances that free the person to be who they are more authentically than who they had to be in that relationship. We've even had people say something just as simple as, well, you know, this year I could cook the foods that I liked for Thanksgiving dinner. So there's a huge spectrum of that idea of gifts in grieving.
Can people get stuck in their grief? Meaning, can they just, do they feel hopeless? And, you know, we hate to think of it, but some people unfortunately do commit suicide because it becomes too much to bear. But what would cause someone to get stuck in their grief?
Well, I think we touched upon it a little bit already, that we're living in a death-denying, grief-denying society for the most part, which means that it's not readily talked about. So people who are grieving get the message that I can't talk about this.
Right.
I'm going to bring people down. I need to be strong. I have a strong faith, so why would I cry? Different things like this. And it's a very strong message that stiff upper lip, keep on moving, get closure, get over it. It's 6 months now, aren't you done? So you're getting all these messages. And when we avoid expressing the mourning part, even if we're grieving, if we don't do that mourning part, let it out, whether it's thoughts, feelings, when we stuff it down, it can cause problems, physical problems,
Relational, I'm sure.
yeah, problems in your relationships.
Yeah. Wow.
People's individual coping skills is also an important factor, you know, how you cope with stress. People do that more or less well. The numbers of deaths, we call it cumulative grieving. If you have had the unfortunate circumstance to have a number of losses that have sort of stacked up on you, it can be a real challenge. If you use substances to cope, that can also be a complication as well.